Hello everyone, my name is Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And I freely admit that that world is no utopia. But it's no dystopia either. Even so, that doesn't stop me from appreciating the ideas and concepts that go into both. Because there's a unique appeal to it, both in fiction and in real-world visionaries. It's interesting to contemplate. What are the true makings of a utopia? How does it operate? How do you go about it? How do you maintain it? There's a similar, albeit darker, appeal to dystopias. They still pose similar questions, like how did the world get this bad? How is this draconian system maintained and sustained? And how do the people even live in this system? It's all great fodder for various thought experiments, but when they manifest in movies, TV shows, or comics, it can make for an amazing spectacle. And in terms of raw spectacle, 90s action movies were legendary for delivering in so many ways. Now granted, most of those movies did so by ripping off Die Hard relentlessly, but they were still fun in their own right. But one movie that really stood out was Demolition Man, a 1993 action-packed slugfest featuring Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes. This movie was very much a product of its time, and yet it's one of those rare 90s movie gems that has only gotten better with age. It has all the right ingredients. You've got a tough, hard-nosed, uncompromising cop in John Spartan. You've got this dangerous, violent, chaotically evil criminal in Simon Phoenix. Pit them against each other, and it's just pure 90s action fun. It also happens to be one of my favorite movies personally, and it's still held in high regard within nostalgia circles. Now, there are many things that make this movie great, from the action, to the characters, to the cinematography, to the fight scenes. But for this video, I want to focus primarily on the world building around Demolition Man. That includes the world John Spartan comes from, as well as the world he wakes up in. Because both worlds have dystopian and utopian elements to them, and both have unique dynamics that influence the characters as well as the events that played out in the story. Some have even become more relevant today than they were when the movie originally came out. The fact that a movie can do all that and still let Stallone be a badass is a hell of an accomplishment, and one that's worth delving into. Like other movies from that era, Demolition Man entwined itself with the prevailing issues of the time. The early 1990s were pretty chaotic for certain parts of the country, especially downtown Los Angeles. This was around the tail end of the crack epidemic, as well as the days that saw the rising power of Mexican drug cartels. On top of that, events like the LA riots were still fresh in the public consciousness. It highlighted a growing mistrust of police and authority figures, especially in urban areas, an issue which is still very contentious today. While things haven't completely fallen apart in our world, it got considerably worse in John Spartan's world. When Demolition Man begins, we see a vision of Los Angeles that is just a mess. The Hollywood Hills are burning. Criminal gangs have taken over. Innocent civilians might as well be target practice. The government and the police are undermanned and under-equipped to deal with it. It's a terrible place to be a cop, but it's perfect for criminals like Simon Phoenix. This man is an apex criminal in a perfect environment. He's so brutal and ruthless that he effectively carves out his own little kingdom in the heart of Los Angeles, one he rules with brutality and his own kind of quirky deviance. It's hell for everyone else, but for him, it's heaven. This world is a true paradise for criminals and deviants of all kinds. Simon Phoenix just happens to be the worst. It's a world where institutions have failed law-abiding citizens. The criminals hold all the power and all the leverage. The only ones who really threaten that power are the John Spartans of the world, the authorities who can't be bullied, bribed, or intimidated. That's the foundation for the rivalry between John Spartan and Simon Phoenix, but it's also the one crack in Simon Phoenix's perfect criminal utopia. Because like every utopia, including those favored by criminal deviants, there's always a fatal flaw. Phoenix's criminal empire had the necessary ingredients: money, power, and a willingness to inflict violence. There's literally no line he wouldn't cross to maintain his power. But even if he manages to corrupt 99% of all authorities, there's still that remaining 1%, and that's really all it takes to bring him down. It's the fatal flaw in every criminal enterprise. They have to succeed 100% of the time to keep things going. But the authorities only need to succeed once. John Spartan, being incorruptible, determined, and a total badass, was the only one who could exploit that flaw. But in that same moment, we uncover another key aspect of this world. Even when someone succeeds in taking down a monster like Simon Phoenix, they still lose in the grand scheme of things. Because law and order has been so eroded in John Spartan's world, he's easily framed for the death of 30 civilians. It's what leads to his punishment, sentenced to be cryogenically frozen alongside many of the same criminals he used to fight against. And the fact that society has resorted to freezing criminals is another ominous sign. It shows that the old methods of law enforcement just aren't working anymore. Extremes are necessary to restore order. John Spartan himself epitomizes this notion. But it's only when he wakes up in 2032 that we understand the extent of these extremes. The world John Spartan enters when he wakes up could not be more different than the one he came from. When Demolition Man flash forwards to 2032, we see a world that has flipped the script on the criminal-run hellhole that was 1990s Los Angeles. The city now goes by San Angeles and is under new management from the top down. And at the top of that management hierarchy is Dr. Raymond Cocteau. He's no Simon Phoenix, but he's no Thomas Jefferson either. This man turned a decaying urban hellscape into a peaceful, clean, high-tech paradise. The people don't worry about getting randomly mugged. They don't have to worry about getting shot, beaten, or assaulted on the streets. They don't even have to worry about their kids hearing ugly rap lyrics on the radio. Now, all music is just catchy jingles from fast food commercials. It may seem great for the Karens and Pat Robertsons of the world, but this is where some parts of that utopia loses some of its appeal. Much like Simon Phoenix, Dr. Cocteau goes to extremes to carve his vision for the world and to sustain it. To him, that means embracing every tyrannical tactic that George Orwell ever wrote about. The people of San Angeles have tracking chips embedded in their bodies. Every inch of the city is watched and closely monitored. And the authorities are intimately involved in the lives of every citizen. They micromanage how they eat, work, play, and procreate. All media is censored. All contact sports are banned. All alcohol, tobacco, and even spicy foods are banned. It's all done in the name of public health and safety. Lieutenant Lolina Huxley, played by Sandra Bullock, explains it very succinctly. Everything that's bad for you is not good, and hence illegal. And thanks to Dr. Cocteau, who runs the show, this idea is rigidly enforced. You can't even cuss without getting fined, an act that's fodder for plenty of humor throughout the movie. You can't even get intimate the old-fashioned way, as John calls it. All things sexual are so tightly controlled that you have to have a license. Naturally, John Spartan is not a fan. From the moment he wakes up, he makes it abundantly clear that he doesn't care for Dr. Cocteau's methods. But being the hardened cop that he is, he still does his job. But the fact that he was unfrozen in the first place is also another revealing sign. It hints that all is not well in San Angeles. We don't learn the full details until much later in the movie, but there are plenty of hints. In essence, Dr. Cocteau's peaceful utopia has the same problem as Simon Phoenix's criminal utopia. It requires a great deal of time, energy, and micromanagement just to keep operating. Logistically speaking, it requires 100% consensus among the population and 100% perfect enforcement by the authorities. And even in a population populated by non-criminals, that's just not possible. So what do you do with the people who won't get with the program? Even with Dr. Cocteau's resources, it still isn't enough. Someone like Edgar Friendly, played by Dennis Leary, still comes along to cause trouble. And to confront that trouble, Dr. Cocteau needs to go to even greater extremes. And at some point, a utopia can only go so far before it isn't much of a utopia anymore. And that's where some of the more dystopian forces enter the picture. Even before Simon Phoenix came along, Dr. Cocteau's utopian vision for San Angeles had issues. Edgar Friendly and his sewer-dwelling compatriots were still active, disrupting the cherished peace and tranquility of this clean and orderly society. But Edgar Friendly wasn't doing this just to piss off Dr. Cocteau. Yes, that was part of it. Friendly made no secret of that. But there was also a distinctly non-criminal motivation behind it. Friendly and his band of deviants weren't looking to rob banks, steal gold, or assault random strangers. They were just looking for food. The people living in the sewers were starving. We even learn at one point that they've resorted to eating rats. These people are not like Simon Phoenix. They're not criminal psychopaths. They're vulnerable, starving people just trying to survive. And that's a key distinction, one that exposes a very dystopian aspect of Raymond Cocteau's world. Now, say what you will about 1990s Los Angeles, at least everyone was on the same page. You needed to be a ruthless criminal on the caliber of Simon Phoenix to create your place in it. The flaws and failures of that world were clear for everyone to see. It was brutal, but that brutality just made them easy targets for the John Spartans of the world. Dr. Cocteau was more cunning in crafting his world. He was even arguably more ruthless than Phoenix. He claimed he took control when people just became too scared to leave their homes, as though he wanted nothing more than to bring peace. However, Cocteau conveniently leaves out the part where he relegated everyone who didn't agree with him to the sewers. In doing so, he effectively creates this permanent underclass atop his pristine utopia. He couldn't maintain control with people like Edgar Friendly roaming the public, telling other people how much it sucked to live in a world where you couldn't drink a beer while reading a nudie magazine. He could only do so much to silence or censor him. At some point, more forceful methods are necessary. But it still wasn't enough. Sending Friendly and people like him underground didn't make them go away. It just ensured there was a full-blown dystopia operating underneath Dr. Cocteau's cherished utopia. It's a paradox, but one that's not in common with utopian visions. You're going to have people who deviate from the program. You're going to have criminals who break the rules, like Simon Phoenix. You can't get rid of them, and trying to do so will create an environment that's nothing short of dystopian. It's like you can't have heaven without hell, or paradise without poverty. And even if only a small sliver of people occupy that dystopia, there's still going to be a problem. Because when people are desperate, starving, and have nothing to lose, they're going to be extremely tenacious. As a result, utopian visionaries like Dr. Cocteau will have to cross more lines to combat them. But at some point, you're going to cross one too many. By then, even the most robust utopia is doomed to collapse on itself. Dr. Cocteau just doomed himself more spectacularly than most. Throughout the course of Demolition Man, both Simon Phoenix and Dr. Cocteau learn hard lessons when it comes to utopias. They're easy to envision, but difficult to sustain. Phoenix and Cocteau invest immense resources in creating and protecting their respective worlds. But it took just one fatal flaw to send it all crashing down. John Spartan was that fatal flaw for Simon Phoenix. The criminal paradise he created in downtown LA collapsed because his brutality made him John Spartan's top target. And if not Spartan, it would have been someone else. That kind of reckless violence was bound to create a lot of John Spartans. For Dr. Cocteau, the flaw was more subtle, but no less damaging. For all his efforts, there were still one too many Edgar Friendlys running around. His police force couldn't deal with him. No one from in his tightly managed society could deal with him. So, in his desperation, Cocteau tries to weaponize Simon Phoenix. Because to Cocteau, Simon Phoenix is basically an anti-John Spartan. He's uncompromising, unrestrained, and unbound by the restraints of ordinary people. He's an unstoppable force, and one Cocteau tries to make even more dangerous through conditioning. And he thinks he can control him. He thinks he can use Phoenix to take out Edgar Friendly and everyone like him. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work, and it costs Cocteau his life. But beyond the satisfaction of seeing this mild-mannered despot fail so spectacularly, there's also a larger message at work here. The issues Cocteau faces, and the ones Phoenix faces in his world, reveal the inherent instability of these utopian systems. By their nature, utopias require perfectly functioning institutions that are 100% effective all the time. And since no system or society is perfect, it's bound to fail at some point. When it does, those governing the utopia have to respond. That response often involves more effort in terms of rules, enforcement, and micromanaging. And even when it fixes that one flaw, another will come along at some point. It's a brutal cycle of sorts, one that results in more and more repressive efforts, be it through violence like Simon Phoenix or authoritarian rule like Dr. Cocteau. It just keeps escalating more and more, compounding with each passing threat. Eventually, it just gets to a point where the flaws can't be fixed, or the effort is just too great. Phoenix learned that the hard way when John Spartan finally took him down. Dr. Cocteau learns that the hard way when he fails to control Simon Phoenix, a failure that Spartan himself actually warned him about. Both men watched their respective utopias fail. They both failed to realize that the dystopian systems around them could not be stopped. They were going to catch up with them eventually. It was only a matter of time. And within that time and those brutal cycles, John Spartan himself offers some unique insights. I'm not going to hide my bias here. I think John Spartan is one of Sylvester Stallone's best characters. I'd put him and Demolition Man right up there with Rocky and Rambo. He's the quintessential 90s action hero, a hardened cop with an attitude and a no-nonsense approach to dealing with criminals. At the same time, Spartan is surprisingly deep in his understanding of both worlds. Within the first 10 minutes of the movie, he carries himself like your typical John McClane wannabe. He rolls into the battle, guns blazing, fights the bad guys, and cracks one-liners. But when he wakes up in 2032, we find out that he's no thick-headed brute. He's smart enough and perceptive enough to see these flawed systems for what they are. He saw it in his time as the authorities kept failing to stop Simon Phoenix. He saw it in 2032 when he learns how Dr. Cocteau imposed his repressive, politically correct vision for San Angeles. And he points it out every step of the way. He even calls their system of policing a bunch of fascist crap. He flat out says he'd prefer to ditch San Angeles completely after he gets the job done. He just doesn't play politics or ideology. He's simply a cop trying to do his job. It's a simple, blunt motivation, one that seems to fly over everyone else's head. Even his partner, Lieutenant Huxley, can't understand it at first. She keeps trying to put John Spartan into this complex archetype that fits with everything she thinks she knows about the 90s. She sees him as the legendary Demolition Man, but John Spartan just sees himself as a cop. He says it himself at one point. He just does his job and things just happen to get demolished. And to some extent, that's inevitable when you're dealing with utopias and dystopias. Like I said earlier, their overly complicated systems are inherently fragile. Throw one disruption into the mix, like say an uncompromising cop who will do anything to get the job done, and there's going to be some destruction. It highlights just how vast those systems became in both worlds, and how fragile they were from the beginning. The utopia that Dr. Cocteau creates, as well as the one Simon Phoenix created for criminals in the 90s, relies so much on complex systems. Be they rules on swearing or gang violence, they have to be complex to manage the scope and scale of their society. John Spartan simply isn't that complex, and he never tries to be anything more than a no-nonsense cop. Those systems just don't stand a chance against him. It's like a supercomputer trying to stand against a bolt of lightning. Spartan might not have intended to bring both systems crashing down, but that's what he did. And he did it by simply punching through the complexity and corruption, literally in some cases. It both got the job done and exposed the flaws in these systems. And that's a feat that action heroes from any era can appreciate. Overall, there's a lot to love about Demolition Man. It's a movie that has more nuance than people give it credit for. It has the look, feel, and ambience of a standard 90s action thriller, but it also does some ambitious world building, creating two distinct visions within the same narrative. These visions have two charismatic figures pursuing their own twisted idea of a perfect world. Simon Phoenix pursued a world in which a deviant like him could operate with impunity. Dr. Raymond Cocteau pursued a world free of violence, deviance, and everything that's bad for you. we, the audience, all get to see the various secrets and flaws behind these visions. And it's John Spartan who helps expose them, often by being his tough, badass self. But when he does make a comment or insight, it still holds real weight. He proves himself to be more than some legend from another era. He may have been a product of a more violent time, but he's not without a sense of perspective. He sees what happens when psychotic criminals like Simon Phoenix are allowed to roam free. He also sees what happens when tyrannical despots try to impose their order by force and deceit. It never works out in the long run. It ultimately leads to destruction. And in a fitting irony, he gets blamed for a lot of it. He gets slapped with a label like Demolition Man. But he's not the one who causes the destruction. He's just the one who disrupts these incredibly flawed systems. And those within those systems either never see those flaws or simply don't care to. And if John Spartan can't knock some sense into them, then they're in for a world of hurt. And in the end, Spartan's best insight comes when he confronts Edgar Friendly and the San Angeles Police Department. They're all still conflicted, not knowing what kind of world they'll create in the ashes of this failed utopia. John Spartan, with his usual blunt insight, puts it very succinctly. One side gets a little dirtier, the other a lot cleaner, and somewhere in the middle, they'll figure it out. It's vague and imperfect. Then again, you could say that about the world as a whole. You just can't impose a perfect system on an imperfect world. The best you can do is strike the right balance between order and freedom. That sort of advice is as relevant now as it was in 1993. And for that reason, and so many others, Demolition Man is a special kind of movie classic. One with insights for utopian and dystopian visionaries alike. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care, stay safe, and above all, be well.